This podcast, including any related materials, such as show notes, links, and supportive materials, is provided by Metagenics Institute, the educational arm of Metagenics, Inc., for general informational and educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute medical advice and should not be considered a substitute for discussions between individuals and their healthcare providers. The podcast presenters' views are entirely their own and do not represent the views of Metagenics Institute, Metagenics, or any of their research partners and collaborators, collectively referred to as affiliates. Metagenics Institute and its affiliates do not endorse or recommend any specific healthcare providers, products, or other items or services that may be discussed or mentioned in this podcast. Podcast participants may receive compensation from Metagenics Institute and/or its affiliates. Metagenics products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Ever feel like a terrible partner, a lousy parent, a burnt out, missing in action member of your community? Does not showing up for those valued humans in your life add guilt and shame to those already heavy emotions? Dr. Jen Landa was feeling that exact concoction of emotions combined with physical and emotional symptoms that had her suspect that she should see her OBGYN. That's when she had the shocking realization that as an OBGYN herself, she would have no idea what to do with a patient who presented with the very symptoms and sense of overwhelm that she was experiencing.
Well, I just knew I couldn't do it anymore, and I knew I wasn't doing a good job in anything that I was doing. And that just made me feel so desperate to change something, but I had no idea what it was. Clearly I felt like I was having physical symptoms, but here I am, a doctor, an OBGYN. I'm the person I would go to figure out what the heck's going on, and I don't know what's going on because I was never trained to deal with anything like this.
If medical school had not armed her with answers, what answers could be found? This quandary started a journey into integrative and personalized lifestyle medicine to find new research and evidence-based solutions. Listen as Dr. Landa describes how she escaped the pill for every ill model and has created partnerships with her patients to form lasting health. She explains the extreme upside of breaking free from the allopathic model, where insurance companies have more say in testing and treatment than doctors to whom patients entrust their care. Join us on this episode of The Practice as Dr. Jen Landa illuminates the way to sweeping positive changes for practitioners and patients alike. Hi, it's Dr. Sara Gottfried. I'm here with one of my closest friends, Dr. Jennifer Landa. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here.
I am just thrilled to have a conversation with you because I feel like we first came together when we were kind of comparing notes about switching from being allopathic MDs, both of us OBGYNs, to this more integrative, functional, precision medicine model, personalized lifestyle medicine. I want to start with your story. How did you make that pivot? What was it that was happening for you after 4 years of practicing as an OBGYN?
Yeah, you know what? It was actually, it all came to a head this one particular night, I remember. I ran out to do an emergency cesarean section in the middle of the night, raced to the hospital, and I wound up at the nurse's station desk, hysterically bawling my eyes out, crying. And you might think, well, was it a bad delivery? No, everything was fine. Mom and baby were fine. It was me who was a mess because it was right at that critical juncture that I realized I felt like a terrible wife because I had completely lost my sex drive. I felt like a terrible mom because I had 2 kids by that point. I was 33 years old, and I was just so exhausted, Sarah. And I didn't even want to play with the kids. They were little. I didn't want to play with them. All I wanted to do was sleep. All I was a mean mommy. And so I felt like a terrible wife, terrible mom. And on top of it, that night, I remember I felt like I had just lost my nerve. The adrenaline wasn't fun anymore. It was miserable. And I felt like I was a scared doctor practicing scared medicine. And I just knew something had to change.
This is so huge because I can so relate to that moment of, just kind of having this really clear picture of where things stand. And the part that especially resonates for me is feeling the guilt of not showing up as a wife, and feeling the guilt, as you just described, of not even having the energy left over to get on the floor and play with the kids.
Yeah.
Like we made this choice to have our children. You have 2 children,
Right.
I have 2 children. They're about the same ages.
Yeah.
And to have this sense of obligation and like hope and excitement to raise those kids, but to not be able to show up, with kind of the full sense of energy and engagement. It shouldn't be like that. Like we shouldn't have the type of careers that deplete us so much with the emergency C-sections and, the ruptured ectopics that,
Right.
kind of pull you out of bed in the middle of the night. It shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't be like that.
So you had this epiphany that this is not the picture you had for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. And I knew I wasn't doing a good job in anything that I was doing. And that just made me feel so desperate to change something, but I had no idea what it was. Clearly I felt like I was having physical symptoms, but here I am, a doctor, an OBGYN. I'm the person I would go to figure out what the heck's going on, and I don't know what's going on because I was never trained to deal with anything like this. And that was when I went looking for answers. And it took a while, but, then finally I stumbled upon little by little this integrative medicine sort of thing. And I learned more about, what we used to call adrenal fatigue, and now we talk about the HPA axis, and how that had really just blown everything. That whole concept just blew everything wide open for me.
Yes.
And the fact
Well,
that...
it answers so much of, I think, what we're facing.
Yes.
Not just as OBGYNs, but
Right.
I mean, how many of your patients now would you say have HPA dysregulation?
Maybe 99%.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Like it's ridiculous.
Maybe 99.9.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really rare that you meet a patient who doesn't.
I think I have one.
Yeah, you have one. I had one for a while. I think she was so fine she stopped seeing me.
Yeah, and that's the goal. That's the goal.
That is
eventually.
the goal. That is the goal. But I think so many doctors are suffering from the same thing. And it was amazing to me that finding integrative medicine and learning the things I learned not only helped me treat myself and figure out my own issues, but then it helped me treat so many others. And then, people like you and me, we still struggle to have the balance. We've talked about it many times, to find the balance with the husband, the kids, the work-life balance, all of that. But at least we understand what's going on when we're tipping the wrong way, and
Yes.
how that affects everything. And I think that makes all the difference.
It does.
Because then you have control.
Yeah, and you have solutions. And so you started to look, kind of outside of the allopathic model. Mm-hmm. I know you ended up at A4M in kind of the early days.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what was that like the first time that you showed up at an A4M meeting? Was there other educational training that you did? How did you start to build that bridge to the kind of dream practice that you have now?
Well, it's amazing to think back to that time and how dark that time was and how everything was such a mess. And then it was like coming to A4M was literally like the lights coming on, and everything was new and fresh and exciting. And talk about not being able to sleep at night because the ideas are just coming and coming and the excitement is flowing. And, it was like, in a way, like going to medical school all over again. Like medicine was exciting. I had to go back to all of that biochemistry and detoxification and all of these, really deep concepts that you thought you left way behind in medical school. It was all coming out again, but in a way that was so much more, it just made so much more sense. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't like this cookbook, like patient has high blood pressure, give them a high blood pressure pill. This pill for every ill model.
Yes.
Which is really what medicine is boiled down to. And
Chronic
to
care
instead,
management.
Yeah. And to instead go back to what's really the root cause here? What's really at the heart of the matter? What's causing the problem? And then how do I slowly but surely kind of, I feel like it's, is rebuilding Humpty Dumpty, for myself.
Good analogy.
And for a lot of my patients,
Yes.
And for me, it was just the most exciting time. So I went to several A4M conferences. Then I jumped into the MMI fellowship. That was when I found that.
And this was around 2002?
Yeah, 2002, 3, 4, right around that period of time. I was with the first graduating class of fellows.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was so amazing. And I learned so much. There's a module that's all about GI, a module that's all about neurology. So you learn about the HPA axis, you learn about the gut-brain immune axis, how that fits in with autoimmune disease, and, and then how it all fits in, of course, with hormones, our favorite topic.
Yes.
And it was just such a different world for me. And I was able to do things with my patients that I was never able to do with my traditional medicine training.
You mean in terms of healing them and
Yeah.
actually helping their problems and like
Yes.
addressing the root cause and
Yes.
solving those problems?
And truly have them feel amazing.
Yes.
And what I think the most amazing for me as a practitioner and other practitioners that I work with is that it's like a doctor heal thyself sort of thing, right? Because once you get into the integrative medicine world, if you're doing it right, you're hopefully also giving yourself some work-life balance. It's the grind of traditional medicine nowadays. I shudder to think what would have happened to me if I stayed with it. Nowadays, every doctor pretty much is a hospital employee. You have no control over what you prescribe because the insurance company tells you what you can and can't do in terms of testing, in terms of treatment. And, the drug companies are forcing drugs down your throat and this and that. And truly, the way we're doing it, it's the way patients want it.
Oh, it's totally the way patients want it.
Patients want to get to the root cause. They don't pills shoved at them all the time.
No. They don't want 7-minute appointments.
No.
And they don't want, I feel like as a physician, I hung in there probably ridiculously long. You were smart to get out sooner out of allopathic medicine after 4 years of practice.
Just more desperate.
I hung in there for 10 years for some reason. But, I feel like that loss of autonomy for a physician is really important.
Yes.
Where you think that you went through this medical training. We all kind of gave up our 20s to
Right.
medical education. You think that you're going to come out and practice and be able to do what you think is the right thing. And
Yeah.
yet the truth is there's often so much control exerted on you that you don't have the autonomy to do
Right.
what you were trained to do, what you were educated to do, the kind of quality that we were educated to deliver.
Right. And I think that lack of control is probably what makes doctors feel the most hopeless.
Yes.
And when you feel hopeless, there is just that sums up in a word what I felt that night at labor and delivery, the hopelessness of just, I'm a bad wife, I'm a bad mom, I'm a bad doctor, and how the heck am I ever going to change any of this?
Well, what I love is that you took that moment of, really it was like a calling, a call to action, that there's a different way. What happened as an early pioneer is that you shifted from allopathic medicine to this other model, this integrative functional medicine systems biology model. And you did it when there wasn't a lot of support for how to do it.
Yeah.
So you did a lot of this on your own. You had some entrepreneurial spirit that kind of carried you through. Can you talk a little bit about your practice now?
Sure.
And what it looks like? What do you love most about it? Especially I think so much about the allopathic physician who's watching us or listening to us, who's still feeling kind of stuck in that old allopathic model.
Yeah.
So I want to offer some bridges, some different ways of climbing out of that.
Sure. So for me, it all started with truly kind of looking for a way out. It wasn't necessarily looking for the answers as much as it was maybe looking for a way out. And, but I was, I'm a girl. I was always interested in beauty. And I started getting interested in aesthetics and started looking to lasers for aesthetics and facial rejuvenation and all of that kind of stuff. And started reading Pericone's books. And then I started to realize that there was this whole concept of, well, if I could improve my nutrition and if I could take some nutritional supplements and kind of improve my health from the inside, lower inflammation, that would improve my skin. And then I started to realize the tie-in with cardiovascular health. And I have a really bad family history. I have both of my parents are diabetics, overweight all their lives, hypertensive, heart disease. So that's my family history background, and I knew I had to take steps to prevent that. So this was like in my mid-30s. And so I was fascinated by all that. And then I found A4M. And then, like I said, it was like this explosion. And then I went forward, took the fellowship. And so here I was at this crossroads. Is like I had this new way of helping people, but it wasn't fitting in with my allopathic model because I realized I needed time to spend with these people to explain to them all of this stuff I wanted to do with bioidentical hormones and supplements and, all of these new things. And you can't do that in a 7-minute visit.
No.
But then you can't really make a living if you're not really seeing patients pretty quickly.
Right.
So, of course, the obvious answer that I was told by one of my mentors was, Jen, you got to give up insurance. And to me, that was incredibly scary.
Why?
Will I
because
have
of the
patients?
security?
Yeah, you're not listed in the insurance manual anymore. Who's going to find you ever, So I was lucky enough to meet the CEO of Body Logic MD at one of the A4M conferences, and I wound up jumping in both feet. So I wound up with kind of like a hybrid GYN, BHRT supplements, sort of beginning integrative medicine practice. But I knew I needed to really switch over full time, give up the GYN, switch over to integrative, give up insurance and all of that. And at the time I was living in New York. But I'd always really wanted to relocate my family to Florida. And Body Logic MD was this great way to do all of it. So when I treat patients, this whole HPA axis thing, and this is for you doctors listening too, one of the biggest things sometimes we have to do is take a really big leap and change our life.
Yes.
And people just look at me and they say, well, I can't. And I say, well, I picked my whole family. I changed my specialty, dropped OBGYN that I had trained so hard for. I picked my whole family up, moved from New York to Florida, and opened an integrative medicine practice. You can.
If I can do it, you can do it.
Exactly. And, it's scary as heck, and it was scary as heck. But you know what? It wound up being the best thing I ever could have done. And so I'm in my 12th year of my Body Logic MD practice.
12 years!
12 years in Orlando, Florida. And I'm in my 9th year of being Chief Medical Officer of Body Logic MD.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so you're right. I did build myself a dream practice and kind of a dream life in medicine and even personally. And it's incredible to think that, 15 years ago it was looking so bleak.
Well, yeah, going back to feeling the compassion for that young woman who just went through an emergency C-section. I mean, you just say that and my adrenaline that goes through the roof, right? Like just the phrase alone, right?
Yeah, totally.
So, just thinking with so much compassion about her and that arc that you've had to this dream practice that you now have, it's just really lovely to witness that. Could we get a little bit more granular? I would love for you to talk more about kind of the architecture of your week, because
sure.
if I was still an allopathic physician kind of stuck in that insurance-based model and I heard about your week, I would say, sign me up.
Yeah.
So let's hear about your week.
I can totally see that. So I see patients from 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and I finish by around 3:30 in the afternoon, 3 days a week, Tuesday through Thursday.
Yes.
I do some administrative stuff usually for maybe an hour or so after work. And then on Mondays and Fridays, it's kind of a combination of some admin stuff for my practice, some admin stuff for my chief medical officer role, some writing talks, because I do a lot of education, doctor education in this field in integrative medicine, which is one of the things I really love to do.
And you're so talented at it.
Oh, thank you. And so writing talks and things like that, or traveling to speaking engagements and things like that, or taking yoga, which is one of my passions. And so Mondays and Fridays, my favorite yoga teacher teaches in a local class. And so it's kind of, and then, doing things for the house, like just, managing the kids in the house and the bills and, all the typical stuff. But my family, my husband and I, we set aside about 10 weeks a year to travel.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wait,
travel's
can we just
passion.
take that in for a moment? 10 weeks. 10 weeks per year. Because it's a priority.
Yes.
Because of that moment after the emergency cesarean section where you were just like, this is not the kind of wife I wanted to be. This is not the mother I wanted to be. This is not the person I wanted to be. This is not the doctor I wanted to be.
Right.
You wanted to change it, and that's what I feel like you embody now.
I do my absolute best, but I will not lie. I literally some days feel like I'm walking on a balance beam to try to strike that perfect balance. And you know what? That's what I've realized. I've always kind of waited for that day when I would achieve perfect balance, nirvana, whatever that would look like, right?
It's hypothetical.
It is totally hypothetical. And what I realized, it's a thing that I'm going to strive for every day of my life. Mm-hmm. It's not a destination that you'll ever get to.
It's a process.
It is, but we're always going to be in that process. We're always going to be in that struggle, if you will. But boy, it's a lot easier now than it was back then.
It's a lot easier, and there's something about, I think, the alignment of being able to take care of patients the way that I always imagined when I went through my medical training. Like this,
Yeah.
I'm finally getting the delivery. Like I'm getting exactly the way I sort of expected myself to be as a doctor in the world. And there's something really satisfying about that. I mean, satisfying especially for the patients who get better, who reverse their diabetes and, get their HPA dysfunction remedied.
Right. Yeah, get their sex life back.
Get their sex life
with
back.
their partner.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're going to have to do
huge.
like a separate podcast on sex drive because I think that's such an important topic.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up, anything you want to share about, kind of that sense of hope for a clinician who's still kind of stuck in the old model?
Sure. Before that, one thing that was really hitting me as we were talking is, I think the traditional medical model, well, I think everybody knows it's broken in a lot of ways, right?
Yes, broken.
And, but I think one of the biggest breaks of all might be the fact that we don't treat each other or ourselves with compassion. And if we don't, how are we going to have that compassion for our patients? To me, the traditional medical model was a world devoid of compassion. And like you said, to kind of look back at that young woman that I was and to try to really have compassion for her and for where she was. And that's hard because you're taught to be tough.
Yeah. You're taught to, to kind of maintain that objectivity, like don't let things sink in through your skin, like don't have thin skin. I'm a totally thin-skinned person. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like it's almost like Brené Brown's work of it's through the vulnerability that we access our greatest strength. Yeah. Like I really believe that. And I think through sharing our stories, like our own stories of, kind of being pre-burnout, of, being so frustrated with the old model, and then, searching, trying to find another model that might suit us, that might be our dream practice.
Right.
The more that we talk about that and share it, I think it helps lift others up as well.
I think so too.
And I agree, but that compassion is such an important piece because when you don't really tune into what's true for you and have compassion for that suffering girl after the C-section, suffering young woman, it's it kind of shuts you down.
It does. Well, that's what I'm thinking. If we can't have compassion for ourselves and each other, how can we have compassion even for our patients? They say to love, you have to first love yourself. Yes. And I think to have true compassion for your patients and for everybody else around you, you have to have compassion for yourself.
Yes, totally agree. Anything else that you want to share about Body Logic MD or, you guys have grown pretty fast. Do you want to say something maybe about the model and how people can learn more?
Body Logic MD is an amazing model. We have about 45 practices or so across the country. It's a franchise model, and it's a network of integrative medicine doctors, dare I say the most highly trained network. We require all of our doctors to go through the MMI fellowship that A4M puts out. So it's an extensive training in integrative medicine. And doctors are free to practice medicine as they will, but we all have the same training, so we all practice in a similar style, in a similar vein. And truly one of the things that we are to each other, and we say it all the time, is we're like a family. We really do have that compassion for each other as physicians, and we're always there for each other. Like you said, this integrative medicine model sometimes is a little scary because there's a whole allopathic model out there that kind of sometimes, unfortunately, poo-poos what we do, discounts what we do, despite the fact that there's
so much
tons of
evidence to support what we're doing. Yes.
In most cases, more evidence to support what we're doing than just writing scripts.
Totally.
And so being part of the Body Logic MD community, you feel so much support because we're all on the same page, all doing the same thing.
You understand each other. You speak a common language.
We do. And we have what I call the Body Logic MD Brain Trust, which is daily we are on the email as a big group together. And anytime you have a question about what's going on with the patient or how do you handle something or anything really, you'll have 10 answers within an hour or so.
That's huge, to have that sense of community.
Exactly.
I think especially like when you first started out in 2002 and you left labor and delivery and you started searching around and you ended up at A4M, there wasn't a big community then, right? Like I remember,
much smaller.
I remember teaching myself, like listening to Jeff Bland tapes, watching some of the conferences that were being done in integrative medicine. And there was kind of a solitary quality to it because there weren't a lot of people to talk to. I hadn't met you yet. And it can be very solitary. So I just want to emphasize how important that sense of community is, especially to bounce ideas or to run a case by somebody.
Absolutely.
The complex cases, which I tend to get a lot of. I tend to attract complex cases.
And I think that is one of the nicest things about even traditional medicine is that you have this medical community that you feel a part of.
Yes.
And then when you go into this integrative space, you can feel very alone because you're suddenly doing something very different than the rest of your colleagues, and you might hang a shingle and open an office all by yourself and feel extremely isolated and alone when you're not used to that. You're used to having this hospital community and all the doctors around you and referrals and this and that. And that's what I love about Body Logic MD. It gives doctors who are doing integrative medicine this kind of immediate sense of community.
Love it. Love it. So we'll put in our show notes a link to learn more about Body Logic MD. Do you want to just say a little bit about how people can read a little more about what you guys are up to and how to get involved?
Sure. Pretty simple. Our website, bodylogicmd.com. We have pretty much anything you'd want to know on there. And there is a tab that's for physicians specifically. And there's a contact on there to get involved, to get in touch. We have 2 different ways mainly that physicians join us. They either can buy a franchise or they can join an existing franchise. And there's lots of information on our website about doing both.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, next time you come on, we're going to talk about sex drive. I'll just warn you now. That's going to be a really hot conversation.
One of my favorite topics.
Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us today.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us for this episode of The Practice. You'll find extensive show notes, including links and supportive materials, over at thepracticepodcast.tv. While you're there, explore other topics and use the Ask and Answer button to ask your burning questions and give your insights about the topic. After all, the future of medicine lies in dialogue, not dogma. Let's transform medicine together by connecting on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You'll find all the links at thepracticepodcast.tv. This podcast, including any related materials such as show notes, links, and supportive materials, is provided by Metagenics Institute, the educational arm of Metagenics Inc., for general informational and educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute medical advice and should not be considered a substitute for discussions between individuals and their healthcare providers. This podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship and should not be considered a substitute for the independent professional judgment of any physician or healthcare professional regarding the appropriate course of action for a particular patient or individual. Metagenics does not make any guarantees regarding the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of this podcast for any particular purpose. Listeners may use this podcast at their own risk, and patients should not disregard or delay seeking advice from their healthcare providers based on the content of this podcast. Participation through the Ask and Answer button is optional, and no participant should feel obligated to provide personal details, including about any diagnosis, symptoms, or other health-related information. Neither Metagenics Institute nor any of its affiliates seek this information, and it is not necessary to participate in the dialogue regarding this podcast. The podcast presenters' views are entirely their own and do not represent the views of Metagenics Institute, Metagenics, or any of its research partners and collaborators, collectively referred to as affiliates. Metagenics Institute and its affiliates do not endorse or recommend any specific healthcare providers, products, or other items or services that may be discussed or mentioned in this podcast. Podcast participants may receive compensation from Metagenics Institute and/or its affiliates. Listening to this podcast does not obligate you to purchase, use, recommend, or prescribe any Metagenics or Metagenics Institute products or services, including their educational materials. Metagenics products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Unless approved by Metagenics Institute, this podcast must be used only for personal, non-commercial purposes. This podcast has no independent economic value and is intended to comply with all applicable laws. It may be rescinded, revoked, or amended at any time without notice. Listeners who are patients should talk to their healthcare providers if they have any questions regarding the content discussed in this podcast. Listeners who are healthcare professionals may obtain more information by visiting metagenicsinstitute.com, calling 888-690-8500, or emailing med@metagenicsinstitute.com.